Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I will be your lovely moderator for this. My name is Shama Hyder. I'm founder and CEO of Zen Media. We have a real treat with us today because I have with me Tim Noonan, who is founder and CEO of Evertrak. And Evertrak has been making some great strides in the railroad industry. I'll let Tim talk a little bit more about that. But really, for all of you out there, what you need to know is Tim comes from a long line of leaders in manufacturing, but is one of the few brave, rarer ones that has really pushed for innovation in a perhaps otherwise more let's say slow to change industry. So Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I know that folks are really going to find what you have to share incredibly valuable, as I know I always do.
You're welcome, Shama. I'm great to be here. Thank you so much.
Um, I gave like a very quick overview of Evertrack, but maybe you could share a little bit more about Evertrack. I mean, obviously you work with some of the greats, Union Pacific, Sumitomo. You've attracted a lot of attention.
You're very kind. Thanks, Shama. One of the oldest aspects of American logistics infrastructure is our railroad. Wonderful book called Nothing Like It in the World that describes this incredible machine that was put together. Keep it in mind that what created the Transcontinental Railroad, President Lincoln signed that law on the same day as the Battle of Antietam Creek. And that's what created this across the continent railroad. And as the railroad was built, it went through forests, and and bridges were built, and you blow ballast granite to make ballast, and then you chop down trees to make railroad ties, and you put steel on top of those wood railroad ties. Well, we're innovating this wood railroad tie that really hasn't seen innovation since the Civil War. It's 7 by 9 inches in profile. It's 8.5 feet in width. It's made out of wood, and big innovation was 100 years ago when they wanted to use a byproduct from the coal industry, which was creosote, and creosote allowed these ties to last longer. Well, the challenge is that we don't have any more 100-year-old trees in our continent. And not only that, we've gotten warmer, there's more bugs and there's more moisture, and you can't use as much creosote. So for the 20 million wooden railroad ties that are replaced every year in North America, 4 to 6 million of those ties are failing in less than 12 years in the southeastern part of the United States. So we've taken another abundant resource, which is recycled plastic, which is out, there's a forest of plastic outside the door of every community in America. And we've created a railroad tie that is beyond wood. It's as strong as wood. And our customers say it'll last 50 years. So, we've got a customer who's had a certain way of doing things. And, we've got to show them that our tie performs in this very rugged environment.
I love that, Tim, and of course you've had your share of challenges in trying to innovate in an industry that perhaps innovation is not one of the first words that comes to mind. So how do you think about that, Tim? And you've got such a robust background yourself. I mean, you come from you worked at some pretty big names, right? And so is there something? So I guess it's really a two-part question. First is how do you think about innovation from sort of where you sit? And two, in the places that you worked, how do some of the best leaders that you've met also think about innovation?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Shama. Innovation is nothing more than, a good idea that's brought to life that brings value. And I think that in this particular case, and for anybody starting a business or trying to solve a problem, is that, my good friend David Kidder shared this with me. He said, you have to sell a painkiller, not a vitamin. And if you're not selling a painkiller, your customer's not really going to care. And so we knew that our customer had a problem. The thing that we had to overcome, and my experience is, as you shared, I had the great privilege of working at the Boeing company that despite whatever shade people want to throw on the Boeing company, is one of the greatest companies on the planet. They do more to keep not only our country but our world connected and protected in ways that I've always said would make Google look like amateur hour compared to what we did at the Boeing company. But those companies didn't get where they are by taking risk, and big companies and manufacturing companies, the decision making is really about rooting out variance. You want to destroy variance. When you're starting something up, you want a lot of variance until you land on the right thing. And so, for these companies, you've got to, first thing, you got to have a painkiller, not a vitamin. And then the next thing is you've got to recognize that the folks that are running these companies, whether from the CEOs down to the guys that are, installing ties, they're professionals in their job. And you need to meet them where they are. You've got to solve their problem, not only their engineering problem. You've got to fit it inside budgets. You've got to demonstrate that it works. And as a startup, you don't have the luxury of saying, hey, I know you've been around for 150 years. We've only been around for 5, but we're sure our product's going to be around for 50. So it really, deeply is about building customer trust, entering into a dialogue, playing a long game. And then, for us, if we had one keen insight, is that that this customer needed something that was as strong as wood, not as cheap as wood. And it's not going to be as cheap as wood. Wood's very abundant. It's used in ways, ties is one part of what comes out of a wood product, along with, 2x4s and MDF and all sorts of things, plywood. Very robust supply chain. We had to earn a right to innovate with this customer.
Do you think that that's the quality that most of these leaders that you also admire, worked with, shared this idea of putting that customer experience first? And really, I like what you said, that was your discovery, which is they didn't want cheap as, but strong as, right? Like that's
right.
Value proposition.
That's right.
And I don't know if you get that without spending time with your customer either.
Yeah, you've got to meet your customer where they are, and a lot of these customers, when, like, for example, we talk to our customer about total cost of ownership, which is the CapEx, the OpEx, the disposal, the depreciation. But then you really come to find that no one manager or leader in this organization actually owns all of those aspects of total cost of ownership. And if that's the case, the fact of the matter is, if you're a chief engineer on one of these big railroads, you need 2 million railroad ties a year, or 3 million railroad ties a year to make your railroad safe and efficient. And if you're talking about providing a product that is twice the price of the current product, none of those leaders can see 10 or 15 years ahead relative to their budgets. So the challenge to us is this the proverbial chicken and the egg: scale, advanced manufacturing, use of artificial intelligence. We know that we're going to come down the learning curve and be able to deliver a product within 20% of the price of a wood tie, maybe parity with the price of a wood tie, but we've got to get to scale just like everyone else. And the best leaders can see through that. And the other thing that the best leaders can do is that they realize that none of these decisions are bet the company decisions when it comes to failure.
Love that.
Even there's no way you can bet the company on, even if you're saying let's make 10% of our railroad tie buy, let's make them composites, let's intersperse them into the system in such a way that you don't create a single point of failure. The best leaders can see that that's a set of experiments and a set of trials worth going through.
Yeah, I love that, Tim. You've touched on so many great points there. There's so many folks here watching, right, listening, that are going to look to this. And how do you encourage them to think about the long game? I'm sure you have these conversations where they're like, Tim, the sky is falling, right? You know, we're having to deal with tariffs changing every day, and I got my workmen people leaving. Like, there's just manufacturing. It's a very hands-on. Again, you've been in there. There's just so many. I feel like there's always a fire to be put out, which is true of businesses in general. And so, in that sense, how do you still kind of think long term? How do you know, as a leader, some of these folks that you're talking to that are like, well, we've always done it this way, Tim, or like, you know, I think the short term leaders think about like, how does this gonna affect our next quarter? Where I think the real leaders that you're talking about, the innovative ones, you know, the ones that have built something really to last, are thinking, well, how does this go way beyond my lifetime or my tenure? Or how do we, the way I say it is, how do we stay relevant, right? And so, sorry, I will kind of sum up that question in a little bit more concisely, which is, what advice do you have for those folks that would say to you, Tim, I'm constantly putting out fires. There's so much going on right now. How do I even wrap my mind around, how do I prioritize that long-term thinking?
Yeah, well, what I have found about all these leaders at globally elite at scale companies, like our customers like Union Pacific, those leaders got there for a reason. Those leaders, those leaders got there for a reason. Those leaders got there because they had good judgment and because they made good decisions. And I think it's about listening and building trust. I had a leader at one of our customers tell us very directly, we know we have a wood tie problem, and we've got enough wood ties to kind of solve our problem now,
Mm.
but we know it's not going to last. And whoever can get there on performance and price is going to change the market, create a new category around this market. And then there's a bit of a tense conversation, which is to our customer to say, because big companies get to where they're going by managing their supply chains well, and they manage their supply chains by getting good deals. Engineering people set requirements, procurement people get the best deal. And so I do remind our customer that the time to go for price with a startup is after the startup's been able to invest in itself.
Mm.
I'm not talking about, paying off equity investors, making big dividends. I'm talking about clearing out a bunch of risk capital and allowing us as companies to invest in all the things that get you to world-class manufacturing: lean, Six Sigma,
Mm.
maintenance protocols, product development, scale. And then my comment would be, don't think about the price of the first 100,000 ties. Think of the price of the first 5 million ties.
Mm.
And from a weighted average, the first 100,000 ties just aren't going to be that expensive, because the ones on the back end are going to be much, much, much more affordable. But you got to allow us to get there. And the second piece is that there's a misconception about startups that you make a lot of money. Well, in every industry, you're really not allowed to. The structure of industries do not allow you to take out more profits than really the average player in any industry. We're not a software as a service business. 50% of our costs are direct material costs.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we lower price is to get more absorption. The way you get more absorption is to buy more. And so these are the type of long-term conversations that we want to have with our customers. And then we're so fortunate to attract an equity investor like Sumitomo, who sees our vision and gives us staying power and gives us validation that we can be the first ones to get to scale in this little niche.
I love that. And so when the I like what you're talking about, right? Like staying power and sort of convincing. I really like that formula too, which is you have to look beyond like the first 100,000 to say the 5 million. Like, what does that look like? Because you know that you're going to need more ties, right? So I think changing that formula is actually a really good takeaway for folks listening, because it's such a different way to think about value proposition and hopefully help your customer think about it in that way. And I think that's not very unlike technology either, Tim. Like, think about OE and all the digital transformation and all that. So many times, the initial number, the initial project can feel to a customer like, oh my God, we're going to invest so much in this project, or we're doing things. And yes, in the short term, it is. But I think it's a difference between a cost and an investment. And then if you think about the long term and how much easier it makes certain things, or how much faster you're able to scale and grow. And so, it's ultimate leverage, right? I think about technology that way. How do you think about technology in your role, and how you integrate it even with Evertrak as you guys grow? Like, how do you think about technology?
Yeah, it's a really interesting, question for us. We're making such it's a commodity product. It's built on commodities. We really, took a path, kind of startup 101, which is, painkiller, not vitamin, build a minimal viable prototype of the product, test the product, see if you get product market fit, invest a little bit more to see if you can drive scale. You got to be right, and you got to be on time. You got to have the right product, but it's got to be at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 years ago, we had the right product. I think that the wood industry, there is no species and there is no chemical to keep these ties lasting longer. So now we're at a great position where we say, okay, I mean, it's still very much a Rube Goldberg machine. If you kind of look at how we're manufacturing, lots of unskilled labor. But our next turn of the crank, we are going to go to at scale manufacturing, continuous manufacturing, state of the art when it comes to quality and efficiency, OEE targets of world class OEE targets. And we're going to have to learn quickly how to do these things, which is where I do think, there's nothing new under the sun really when it comes to manufacturing, and I think this is where AI can really help us.
Mm-hmm.
Help us with our requirements, help us think about how to build, strong prototypes, strong digital twins of what we're doing, strong control systems. We've got to really face into the reality that of diminishing workforces. We are very, very proud of not only the product that we're building, but right now we've got about 45 employees. The majority of those guys are formerly incarcerated guys.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that everyone's better than the worst decision they've ever made in their life. And seeing those guys come to life, because economic liberty is liberty. You give someone the opportunity to
Amen.
get paid a living wage, right? Have a 401k, be part of a team, know that someone has your back. All those things, that these wonderful citizens who come out of these incarcerated environments, but that the way we're making our tie doesn't scale. And so, we're really looking forward to this next phase of growth. And what we find is that you're able to attract people who want to work on something that's noble, fixing this plastic recycling problem. Shama, as you said, pragmatic green, something that's pragmatic. Like, we didn't set out to build a green company. We looked at a raw material that's outside the door of every community in America and realized we can make a better product to solve a problem. And I think that's pretty exciting for us.
I love that, Tim. And so, I talked to a lot of manufacturing folks, obviously, across company sizes. And one of the things that I always hear, and you mentioned something about this, is how do we reduce even variance, right? And I think AI can be very powerful in that way. because it's like we need to do it the same each time, or we need to be thinking about, and especially as you scale, right? You need systems to help take care of employees. You need systems to help take care of your customers. You need, and so I think so much of this in manufacturing, folks think about how do we systemize the floor, but they don't always think about how do we create those systems for the cloud. And so, I'm really excited that this next phase of AI that we're entering into will help bridge that, right? So not just systems for the floor, but systems for how do we scale.
That's right. And I think, and I'm just starting to work it into, sort of, my playbook as a leader, which is how does a leader, especially a leader, from my genre, my generation, the okay boomer generation, how do we even begin to engage with these tools? How do we become good at asking the right questions? Because a lot of this is not about the answer, but the question, and then getting the playbook. But then you got to run the playbook. You got to execute the playbook. I think what AI can be very, very helpful for is that in our own biases of what's made us successful and how we've been successful, is that it allows you to bring some level of truth, whether it's commercial truth or operational truth, by being able to tell you what might be unknown to you is not unknown to AI, if you know how to ask the question.
Yeah.
And so I'm personally working on upping my game there.
Which I think that's great. There was a recent memo that was leaked by Shopify CEO, and then he made it public, but basically said, like, everybody in the organization needs to be leveraging AI. Like, we need to look at that first before we're asking for resources and whatnot. And I thought it was really interesting because I was like, the thing he doesn't say is, like, it also starts with leadership. You have to. So, I mean, I think just by virtue, if you're watching this, you're one step ahead of most folks, because you're open to learning and you're engaging and you're saying, like, I want to learn from folks. I want to be able to, like, to your point, ask good questions. Tim, how do you convince people? But how do you get folks to think of innovation? And, well, let me ask it this way. How do you get people to look at what you're doing and think, well, we've always done it this way? Like, what is the antidote to we have always done it this way? Because I feel like that often ends up being sort of a mantra for industries that are, because they're tried and true, right? They're doing certain things because they've been working for them. But as we move further, we know that what's always worked is no longer going to, like, what got you here may not be the thing that gets you to the next level.
Yeah, what's interesting about our product is that in many ways, we're not asking our customer to make that trade-off. We're building a product that's in the same form factor. It installs just like wood. It has the same engineering, relative to modulus of rupture and modulus of elasticity, kind of breaking without bending as wood. What we're asking them to innovate around is how they think about total cost of ownership, how they think about the value of not having to deploy sets of resources that they've already optimized their business for. If you're a big railroad and you've optimized your capital equipment and your crews and how you do scheduling to replace 4 million ties a year, and you say, hey, we want you to replace 4 million ties a year for 7 or 8 or 9 more years. But once these ties start lasting 10 years, 12 years, you're not going to replace any more of those 5-year-old ties. So you're going to have to redeploy your resources differently into ballast maintenance or into other ways of maintaining your track. And so, my view is that this our customer knows what they want. They know what they want, and if they see it, and if they see the performance, and they can start to see it fit inside their budget profiles, they're going to go with us. They're going to go with us, and we need to convince this customer. I think if there's anything that we're going to have to convince our customer of the next kind of turn of the crank is new product development and scale offer the path to better competitiveness. And so, just like an airplane, just like a car, you don't need to test something for 4 or 5 years before you deploy it commercially. If we can have first principles conversations about, does the chemistry change? Does the engineering requirement change? Just because it looks a little bit different doesn't mean it is different. So if we could, that pace and rate of product adoption is really what's going to make or break. Because one of the things our customers said, which I think is so ironic, is that they said, well, wait a second, you've built the product we've been waiting for. It's great, and now you're going to go change it. It's like, yeah, we're going to go change it because you said it costs too much. We're happy to leave it the way it is, but you got to buy a couple million of them. Well, it's too expensive. So, we're responding to our customers' need.
Yeah, I love that you talked also about the rate of adoption, right? The test something quickly, get it to market. And so a lot of what I find myself talking to people about these days, Tim, is urgency. And I feel like the lack of is permeating folks. Like everything that's happening, it's like almost like they're the proverbial quicksand. Because I don't think it's actual quicksand, because I know plenty of companies in across industries, including manufacturing, that are absolutely killing it right now, and they're doing really interesting things, and they're moving forward, but it's still that miasma of that stickiness, or I'm stuck. Well, how would you respond to that? Like, do you feel that?
Yeah, I think a reality that you have to accept, especially when you're dealing with globally elite at scale companies, is there is a level of hierarchy, bureaucracy, and positional authority that comes with these companies, and you've got to really understand. There's also another triangle, which is there's requirements, engineering requirements. There's appropriations, which is the money, and then there's the purchasing, which is the buyers. And those all work in a triangle along with hierarchy, bureaucracy, and positional authority. And even if you've got someone at the top of the company who thinks it's a good idea, you've got to bring along everybody throughout the organization. Everybody needs to be brought along. And there's always going to be inside every big company everywhere, and I saw it at Boeing, there are entrepreneurs everywhere. There are entrepreneurs and innovative people thinking about doing things differently everywhere. You got to find them. You got to help them be successful. You got to make sure that they, because one of the things that happens inside big companies is we've all been in those meetings in big companies, and you sell the dream, and the guy goes like this, and he sells the dream, and once you've sold the dream, you can't unsell the dream, right? This is what happens inside. It happens all the time, and if you get a champion who sells the dream, you've got to make sure you deliver on that person's dream, because what a lot of people are really risk averse about is less about the performance out in the field. It's really about what happens to the reputation internally. Did they make a good judgment? Did they bet their political capital in a certain way? Those are real things inside big companies.
Yeah, I love that. And you're gonna like this question, Tim, because I know you. It's it's a David and Goliath question, right? So, what advice would you have for the Davids of the world in manufacturing? And then what advice do you have for the Goliaths of the world?
It's interesting. You can unpack David and Goliath on a lot of different dimensions, right? the classic David is agile, but the classic David also knows what they're doing, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
David's got his stones and he's got his he knows what game he's playing. And so if you're David, you got to stay agile. I mean, and you've got to I think David only had 3 rocks in his pack too, so you got to use your rocks very sparingly. Um, if you're Goliath being your customer, Goliath being your competitor. If Goliath is your competitor, just keep innovating. Stay ahead of them. Stay
Mm-hmm.
ahead of them. I would reframe thinking about Goliath as your competitor or as your customer and say, um, develop a co-creation relationship with your customer where where you're aligning risk, you're giving your customer a win, you're developing a relationship along the way, you're helping advance people's careers in ways that matter, and realize that, especially if you're an entrepreneur, founder, CEO, all you're doing is spending all your time and all your cycles on one product, one narrow thing. Typically, the people that you're dealing with, all the well-intended people that you're dealing with, they're dealing with many things, many things, and most like everybody, the least important thing that they're probably dealing with is you. The most important thing they're dealing with is their kids, and their spouses, and their groups on the weekend, and work is just one aspect of what they're doing, and really, coming at it from building deep working relationships where kind of you see the humanity in everybody, and you're working together to solve a problem, not only the engineering problem, but making their life better, making their day better, uh, giving them a reason to want to pick up the phone and talk to you, because
Yeah.
founder, founder entrepreneurs can be very maniacal and laser focused, and because all I do is think about railroad ties all day long.
Well, I think you kind of have to be, right? In a lot of cases
Yes.
to be able to do that. So let me ask you this. What do you think is the biggest challenge in manufacturing at large? And not just now, but like as you look down and you're like, in the next 10 years, I think this is the biggest challenge. Beyond railroad industry is part of it, obviously, right? But like this sort of broader in manufacturing um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, setting aside the current, climate, it's just really fascinating. If you take a really long lens, is that, our economy is very much driven, by consumer and by consumer goods. And, we as consumers, we wanted cheap stuff, and we our nation gave us exactly what we wanted. We outsourced, washing machines and
Mm-hmm.
dryers, dishwashers and irons and stir crazy popcorn makers. Everything got outsourced. And so, we could ask ourselves, is there going to be a renaissance of just foundational manufacturing coming back? Um, Maybe. It doesn't seem likely. It seems maybe chip manufacturing. It's hard to imagine we're going to make an iPhone in the United States, but I think that I do believe that, from a manufacturing point of view, that we're going to have to continue to build things. We're going to have to continue to build companies, whether we manufacture, whether we're systems integrators, or whether we're final assembly. Um, and we've got to give people the dignity of work. We've got to create, meaningful jobs for people to earn their livelihood. We've got to get people engaged in their communities, and not everybody can run around, delivering food with Uber Eats. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no sense of community there might be some economic liberty in that, but there's no sense of community, no sense of team. And so I think it's a great opportunity to build manufacturing companies,
Yeah.
no matter what you're doing.
I love that. And so it really sounds like you are optimistic about the industry at large, Tim. You know, it's like, of course it'll be nuanced, it'll keep changing, but I pick up a lot of optimism from you.
Yeah, very optimistic. I mean, there's it's going to be higher tech. It's going to take a little bit more training, but there's no reason we can't continue to manufacture great things in America.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, you know, one of the biggest takeaways of what you said is that importance of playing that long game, right? And offering painkillers, not vitamins, which I think goes into is so many times we get stuck doing the thing that we're doing without stepping back and looking at it and saying, okay, but what are the questions I should be asking? How do we think about this long term? How do we make those investments today that we know are going to pay off, and it may not pay off next quarter or next year, but this is what keeps us relevant and around for, you know, a lot longer. So I thought your analogy of, you know, not the first 100,000 ties, but the first 5 million, and now all of a sudden you have a very different equation and answer.
Right on. Yeah, and it takes a certain customer to do that, and it takes a certain you know, you've got to have a radical outside in force to make that happen. You can make a great composite tie, but if the industry has enough wood and they can make wood ties last for 30, 40, 50 years in the southeastern part of the United States, that's what they're going to keep doing. But they can't keep doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody's going to win there. And I think it's going to be Evertrak.
Well, you know what? It certainly sounds like it, because I think you're doing all the right things, Tim. Not just thinking about, you know, from all perspective, right? As a good leader should. You're thinking about your employees. You're thinking about, you know, the impact that you have. You're thinking about that pragmatic green and how you connect those dots. Right? It's not green for the sake of being green, but it just happens. Like it checks all these boxes for you. And I love that you're also thinking about, you know, how do you scale? How do you grow? How do you keep using, you know, the right sort of leverage, if you will, to think about, you know, reducing variance and growing. I've learned a lot, Tim, and we've had so many conversations, but this was incredibly insightful, and I hope you guys did too. If you're watching this, I hope you enjoyed it. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. This was really great.
You're welcome, Shama. Thank you.